The city is the body, the subway is the blood, running through tunnel veins. My Subway Ride by Paul Dubois-Jacobs and Jennifer Swender, 2004. Can you describe just how vital the system is to the city?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the city doesn't work without the subway and bus system. If everyone in New York City had a car, the city wouldn't work. Or if everyone in New York City who has a car uses their car every day, the city wouldn't work. And so the transit system is vital to getting people to work and to school, but also, getting people to the other pieces of their lives, to church and their friends and their family, and it's everything.
How often did you ride the New York City subway pre-pandemic?
Pre-pandemic, I had a monthly card, and so I would just ride it all the time, even just for like a couple of stops. I would say almost every day, maybe 5 days a week. And I would take the bus as well, because we have a bus that drops off right here at the building. So yeah, let's say like 2 or 3 times a day, 6 days a week.
Do you find yourself taking the subway less? Has the way you commuted changed?
As recently as a couple of months ago, I was working on a play, and so that's 6 days a week. Now that there's no play, I go into the city less, so I maybe ride it 3 times a week.
So March 9th, 2020 was your first day.
It was supposed to be. It was supposed to be. Yeah, I ended up starting early, and I was going to do the job for 3 to 6 months.
Right.
I was basically felt like I was stepping into a crisis. It was not the COVID crisis then, although COVID was certainly on the march and was going to be an issue. That was not, I don't think at that point any of us had any idea it was going to be what it became, or that New York would be the epicenter and the leading edge and all of that. And so I had a very small child at home. I had a 2-year-old, and so she just turned 2, and so I agreed to do the job for a few months to stabilize the organization, to recruit someone to come in and be president, and then presumably would go back to being on the board. And within a couple days, it was clear that COVID was going to be an even larger part of the job than predicted. And I actually was supposed to start on March 9th. I was winding down by business. I was going to take my family on a little trip, and I just canceled all of it and started early, and was in the office, I think right before I definitely was in the office the week of March 2nd. I always say that that's the week that the taxpayers got for free, because it wasn't worth it to change the paperwork. So I just did the week of March 2nd and didn't get paid, and then started getting paid on March 9th.
When the pandemic first started taking hold of other countries, did you have thoughts about how it would impact New York or commuting in particular?
I don't think we really thought that it was going to come here in that way. I remember watching videos and watching news coverage of what was happening in Italy. That was where I remember it before us. I know it was in so many other places. And it was kind of like, oh, that's crazy what's happening over there. But I never in a million years imagined that it would come to the city and have the impact that it would.
Had I known what was coming, the sort of horror of COVID and the full impact of COVID, had I known that was going to happen, I would have stayed. I would not have resigned. I would have stayed and stood shoulder to shoulder with my colleagues at New York City Transit when I left, which was beginning of February, but I'd resigned in January. Yeah, we'd heard about COVID, we all read about it. There's this weird thing going on in Wuhan, China. I think one case had arrived in New Rochelle or somewhere like that, but no one knew that was going to happen. So I watched actually from the UK. I went back to the UK to swap my visa over and effectively got stuck with the travel ban. And I watched with horror what was happening in New York. And to a certain extent, that influenced my decision to apply for the job for Commissioner of Transport for London.
At the end of February, at the very beginning of March, we had no idea what was coming. We didn't know the seriousness. We didn't know the severity. We didn't know if it would mutate. We didn't know how the virus was going to change. We didn't know how easy it was to spread. And it was very hard to prepare for something that you know almost nothing about. And so one of the first things that I had my executive team do was prepare several different plans for levels of service that we would provide. So there was obviously the easy one, which was run full service, right? Like just don't change anything, everything will stay the same. And then there was run, I think about 90% of service. And in a place like New York, of course, that is a huge change. And then I think we had an 80% plan, a 70% plan, a 50% plan. And then I even had the team drop a plan where we would close the subway system in order to basically be able to hand that tool to the governor if we had to. That if COVID reached a point where the only way to keep people safe was to literally shut down the system so that people were sort of forced to stay home. They had no opportunity to enter the system. If that was believed by the health experts to bring this thing to a halt, we wanted him to have that plan and have that tool in his toolbox. And in that plan, subway service would mostly stop running, although you do have to keep moving trains because there's not enough storage for all of the trains in New York. Although we'd thought about like what the impacts of that would be. But we would run a bus shuttle system that would literally just move doctors, nurses, and would basically shuttle people to hospitals, and then on the way back would move canned goods, diapers, and food to communities that needed resources. And so it literally was thinking about changing the entire transit system and turning it into basically a shuttle service of goods that people would need to stay alive, and a way just to move doctors and nurses and health professionals. Thank God that plan never needed to be implemented, but it was something that we built.
Yeah, good morning to you, Chris and Mary. University leaders here at NYU telling us that all in-person classes will resume as normal today, but all of that will change tomorrow. Like many, they're not taking any chances. In the wake of the coronavirus outbreak, precautionary measures continue to intensify. Administrators from collegiate to primary and secondary schools taking action, more each day. Schools shutting doors to prevent the spread of the virus. At the university level, for instance, NYU will begin remote classes tomorrow.
I mean, that was a homicide. I mean, it was a fire, but it was a homicide. It was a fire that was purposely set and took the life of Garrett Goebel, who I'm still close to his family, and he left 2 small sons and a grieving mother, and it's unimaginable. And so that was a very troubling, surreal experience. It was in the middle of the height of COVID, because of the timing of it. A bunch of folks at Transit and MTA actually had COVID. So Pat Foy, I remember I was at the scene and he called me and told me he had tested positive. And Patrick Warren, who was our chief safety officer, tested positive for COVID. And so, we're responding to the scene of a horrific incident. We've lost someone in our family, and everyone also has COVID. So it was very challenging. And I remember that we had to make some decisions that you would never make if you weren't in the middle of COVID. So, for example, going straight to the like I would normally, after initially being at the scene, I would have gone to see the family immediately. And I remember thinking to myself, I can't go see this family because I've now have two close people who I was within inches of over the last several days have tested positive for COVID. I may have COVID, I don't know it yet. I was certainly wearing a mask, but they had a brand new baby in their house. And so I was thinking, I actually can't go to their home because I can't expose Garrett's wife, his mother, his child, and this brand new baby to COVID. And, so decisions like that I just think made everything harder and worse. And it was, horrible time.
On April 30th, 2020, Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio announced an ambitious plan to clean each subway car every 24 hours. To do this, the subway system needed to close overnight for the first time in its 116-year history. Riders who needed service between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. would have to rely on enhanced bus service or the Essential Connector program.
I thought that shutting down the system overnight was a possibility. And so I want to say we certainly had days to plan. I don't think maybe it was a week and a half or 2 weeks or something like that. It was a plan for how do you take advantage of those hours, right? So how will you execute on the actual cleaning? Will cleaners be riding the train and cleaning while the train is moving, which is obviously not ideal and not super safe? Are they cleaning at stops? Are they, will the train go to the end of the line and then there will be like a sweeping clean and we hold the train for a while and we clean and then the cleaners come off and then the train keeps moving. So there were some logistics like that. And how do you just move people within the system so that they are able to do the cleaning that is required? And then what do you do about the folks who really desperately need the system overnight? And that was even more difficult, and a team set up in pretty unbelievable time. Basically, what you'll remember is like a car service for folks who, your shift at the Amazon warehouse starts at 4 a.m. You would have taken the subway. You're deemed an essential worker. How are you going to get there? And so they pretty quickly stood up an unbelievable, system to move people, sometimes in buses, obviously, but also in commuter vans and cars, and extremely expensive, extremely challenging, but a safe way to move people too.
There was a report by MIT that essentially blamed the subway for the spread of COVID. And this was later proven to be
totally
false.
Inaccurate.
Yeah, inaccurate. So what was your reaction?
Yeah. It was very frustrating. When you're sort of in the middle of a news cycle like that, even the dumbest ideas get a lot of attention because they're newsy, and obviously journalists around the world were, grasping at anything that could, shed light on what was happening. And so I didn't really blame journalists for covering it. I did blame MIT for ever publishing it, which was, I think, about as moronic as I mean, I don't know any, I have no experience in academia, and we need all kinds of ideas out there, but it amounted to suggesting that, there might be more significant spread in, cities where, there are a lot of people, which seemed like common sense to me, and maybe I could have written that paper too. But it was, it was silly, and it was, we spent a lot of resources pushing back on it. The message I felt like I was trying to send was, this is a system that's as safe as it possibly can be during COVID. The other thing we did was try to be really clear with people on what we believed was the science, which was, people are used to packing into subway trains like sardines, right? One thing we were trying to explain to people is a subway train is actually one of the safest places you can be, other than being outdoors in fresh air, because the doors open so often. It's constant recirculation of air. The air quality is quite good. You've got a bunch of outdoor platforms, so not only are the doors opening and recirculating air underground, but then you get outside. We were trying to be really clear about that messaging as well. My feeling was staying home, staying outdoors was the safest that you could be. But if at any time you need to be in the system or traveling, I still believed that it's safer to be in the system on any given day than to be in a vehicle. It just is, and I've always felt that way. I don't put my kids in cars unless I have to.
The COVID pandemic has taken a serious toll on transit ridership.
Yeah.
How is the MTA preparing to cope with this significant loss of riders?
Well, number one, we are doing everything we can to get our riders back. Number one is great service. This January was the best year in terms of on-time performance for the subways in 10 years. Not just the best January in 10 years, the best any month in 10 years. So that's a good sign. Safety, we've turned around the trend on crime and public safety with the action that the governor and the mayor took a couple months ago, and crime is going down, and riders are telling us they feel much safer. The other is to run frequent, reliable service. We are proposing that different stakeholders help to offset the MTA's deficit. We've lost about a third of our riders. It's mostly work from home, white-collar workers who are not commuting to their offices, and we need everybody to step up and help us fill the deficit, fill the bucket, so we can run really frequent service.
I remember there was a lot of conversation about why would we bring it back overnight, and I think that it was mostly because of essential workers that they did that, because there was a big debate over that for a while, that it was going to cost so much money and there was no reason, and that there was going to be so much more crime.
Was this ever even a debate within the agency? And
No, it wasn't. And it was, anyway, I think I remember having this feeling back in the middle of the pandemic that a lot of people were worried about things that could come to pass, and they've always wanted to close the system overnight and this is their chance to do it. People don't take jobs at a transit agency because they're really interested in choking off service, right? Sort of like working in an airline, but being we don't think planes should fly. Everyone who works at transit really wants service to run well and efficiently, and as much service as possible, and serve as many pieces of the community as you can, and have no transit deserts, and and so I was always that's whatever. It feels like a fundamental misunderstanding of how New York City Transit works and how the people who work there think. So it was always coming back. It was just, when can it come back?
On January 15, 2022, Michelle Go was waiting for a southbound train at the Times Square station. Without provocation, a man walked up to her from behind and shoved her in front of an oncoming train. She was killed.
Less than 3 months later, a gunman boarded a northbound N train at the 59th Street station in Brooklyn. As the train traveled to 36th Street, he set off a smoke bomb inside the crowded subway car and opened fire on the passengers. Miraculously, in this incident, nobody was killed. With other incidents such as the killing of Michelle Go and a subway shooting last April, did this increase your concerns about taking the train?
Definitely. Again, I think anyone who tells you that that shoving and that shooting, anyone who tells you that those incidents didn't at least make them think twice or give them just that little bit of sort of gut hesitation is lying. I think it was terrifying.
For sure, it increased my fear and awareness. I was never somebody who was going to stand really close to a train when it was coming up, when it was pulling into the station. But I was very conscious when I came down to the station, who was on the platform with me. I didn't like to be somewhere where I was the only one. And I was very nervous about taking the train again on a regular basis, particularly coming home at night by myself. My whole awareness increased, like in the stations and on the train. I didn't have earbuds in anymore. I took a self-defense course, and that was one of the things that the teacher said. I was just super conscious of who I was getting on the train with, and when the train was pulling into the station, who might be in the car that I was about to get into.
None of these concerns had to do with actually getting sick. It was about the crime in the subway.
It was crime, but also just safety. Yeah, before, if like one of the doors on this side would open, that didn't necessarily mean one thing or another. But now when it opens, I could feel it. I could feel everyone on the train. Your shackles kind of go up, like, okay, who's coming in?
Did your viewers ever raise concerns about subway safety?
We hear from people all the time. The subways aren't safe. What is the mayor gonna do about it? What is the MTA gonna do about it? Other people say, it doesn't matter what the mayor or MTA do about it. I'm never taking it. Whether they increase police presence, they make more security, they have more cameras, and they have done a lot to try to make it at least even feel safer. And a lot of people say, it's just not enough for me. It's another factor when you're listing all the factors for why a place isn't right for you to raise your family. And it's sad because we didn't think much about it before COVID. Viewers tell us all the time that they want the city to do more. And I don't even know that they know what more is. They want things to be better, and they pay a lot of money to live here, and they should have it. It should feel safe.
You know, I think that New York sometimes doesn't, New Yorkers sometimes don't know how bad they have it. You know, I spent so many years in Washington thinking that the politics was getting worse and worse and worse all the time. But when I came to New York, I was shocked by how much worse it is in New York. I mean, New York is absolutely worse politically than Washington. It's obviously not so much Republicans and Democrats fighting, although there's plenty of that. It's various branches of the Democratic Party fighting, and the politics is much uglier. I mean, there were people in the assembly who would not take my phone call, even though I would say, there's like 6 subway stations in your district. Like, I just want to talk to you about them. And, you know, the politics were just so toxic here. It was like, well, you work for Andrew Cuomo, I won't talk to you on the phone. Or I'll get on the phone only to tell you to go pound sand and that I'll never support anything you're doing. It's very bizarre. And I think if New Yorkers sort of saw behind that curtain and realized how broken it is, they would probably demand change. You know, people used to say, like, she's calling for more police. This is, you know, they turned it into a political, you know, firestorm. This is, you know, Andrew Cuomo having a fight with Bill de Blasio. This is about moderates, you know, having a fight with progressives about crime. It's actually none of that. What it was about was crime going up in ways that were totally unacceptable in the system and that were completely in conflict with being able to bring people back to New York and being able to show people a system that is safe, that they feel comfortable in, that they will, you know, ride at night, that they will ride with their children. So the politics around that was very frustrating to me, and felt like the public safety issue was constantly being used as a political football. I felt like we needed to have an all of the above approach, not just a police approach. And the answer was often, we don't agree with the policing of the NYPD, which I was sort of like, I don't think I do either. But let me tell you, I cannot fix that. I cannot fix the NYPD approach to policing while I also run a transit system. So if someone else could fix how the NYPD works, I'll work on this other stuff. It was just frustrating that it became such a political football. And I think where we've landed is an acknowledgement that, crime in the system had reached totally unacceptable levels. It was creeping for a while, and then we had, for many years we averaged 1 to 3 homicides in the system, and we have quadrupled that over the last years, and that can't be. That doesn't work. It won't work for New York.
I think it got worse during the pandemic. I feel like now it's a little better. There's more people riding the train, so when there's more people, then there's less of a sense of there's an outlier and we're all kind of exposed.
We say everything is going to be okay because they are one-off incidents, and the vast majority of subway rides are safe, and you are safe when you ride the subway. But having those random incidents happen, especially the shooting, for me, we hadn't had something happen like that during the morning commute. And that to me felt like there was a new level of sort of brazen feeling of it's the Wild West here.
I've always thought that articulated trains, open gangway trains, are the way to go in New York. I honestly think they will be a roaring success because you do have greater capacity with open gangway. The ambience is better. You can move about the train. You've got more flexibility in terms of loading. To me, it is without question the way to go. I think they're doing the right thing. They're going to trial open gangway to test it in terms of operations and customer reaction. But I would be very surprised if that doesn't generate ultimately a firm order for lots of those new units. I could see that would be a standard operation in New York in years to come.
Do you think that the benefits of the open gangway still outweigh the potential risks?
I do. I think the kinds of incident you're referring to is still, we need to stop those incidents, but they're still so rare that I feel like, knock on wood, thankfully, that the benefits, likely will outweigh the negatives. Generally, the MTA has over time been, pretty good about testing, we don't move quickly, they don't move quickly, they're not efficient enough, but, we test all kinds of cars, we, run different kinds of service. It doesn't, none of it turns on a dime. It's like a, very slow ship that's turning, but, I think my perspective is ultimately these will be better cars, and we'll see. The proof will be in the pudding, and we'll see how people feel, a year, 3 years, 5 years from now, and we'll see what happens.
My first thought is it increases safety because there's less risk of falling on the tracks, and also it creates more space. Like on the accordion buses, you can actually house people there. I hadn't really thought about it in terms of safety. I guess I don't have that door opening warning, but on the other hand, you could see something coming sooner.
Or
hear something, yeah.
The main thing we can do to prevent crime is what we're doing right now, to have a lot of police in the system, a lot of visibility in the system, cameras all through our stations, 10,000 of them, now cameras on the trains as well. That was a governor initiative. And to make sure that riders know, that there are cops around and that they have someone to help them in an emergency. But the physical trains themselves have some other important safety features. If you push a button, one of the help buttons inside the car, it alerts the train operator and the conductor about where that, it turns on the camera to that spot so they can see what's going on, hopefully, and if necessary, intervene. We're never going to stop crime entirely. It is New York City, but we're down to, 3 to 5 crimes per day. Actually, 3 to 7 crimes per day. Just as a point of reference, We have 3.5 million riders a day, even after COVID, about the same as the population of the city of Los Angeles, 3 to 7 crimes a day. I'm sure that Los Angeles would love to have those numbers. We're doing well, but we can't stop. We can't take our foot off the gas on safety.
Which seemed like common sense to me, and maybe like I could have written that paper too.
Every time I go, it's like, 275, better make it worth it.
There is no traffic. You are the traffic anchor.
3 to 7 crimes a day. I'm sure that Los Angeles would love to have those numbers.
I used to pinch myself and think, how can some kid from Plymouth be in charge of New York's legendary subway?